When Loretta Lynn passed away in 2022, millions mourned the queen of country music. But for her daughter, it wasn't just the loss of a legend, it was the closing of a chapter that the public never truly understood. Because behind Loretta's fire, her faith, and that unforgettable Kentucky twang, there was one name that kept echoing through her story: Conway Twitty. For decades, fans wondered what really happened between them. Were they soulmates? Was it all rumor? Or something even deeper? A bond that could never fit inside the world's expectations. Loretta always protected that truth. But her daughter has finally decided to speak, revealing what her mother never said aloud, and what Conway himself never stopped feeling. Because what she's revealed about Loretta and Conway isn't about tabloid whispers or old stage duets. It's about devotion, sacrifice, and the quiet kind of love that outlives the spotlight. It was 1971, when Loretta Lynn first crossed paths with Conway Twitty. She was already a force in country music, a coal miner's daughter who had clawed her way from poverty in Butcher Hollow to the top of the Nashville charts. Conway, on the other hand, had transitioned from rock and roll to country, reinventing himself with a voice as smooth as velvet and lyrics that hinted at heartbreak. What neither of them expected was how their paths would merge into one of the most iconic partnerships in country history. Their chemistry was immediate. From the moment they performed together, audiences could feel something electric, something that went beyond rehearsed harmonies. Songs like Louisiana Woman, Mississippi Man, and After the Fire Is Gone weren't just duets. They were conversations. Every line, every glance, carried a weight that made fans lean in, wondering if they were seeing more than a performance. Offstage, Loretta admired Conway's discipline and quiet strength. He wasn't loud or reckless like many stars of that era. He was thoughtful, loyal, and fiercely protective of those he cared about. To Loretta, who had spent years fighting her way through a male-dominated industry, that kind of steady presence was rare. Their friendship deepened as they toured together, spending long stretches of time on the road, nights filled with laughter, shared stories, and a mutual understanding of fame's loneliness. But for Loretta's daughter, the story always had a gentler side. She remembered how her mother spoke of Conway with respect, sometimes even tenderness. She said he was one of the few men in the business who treated her as an equal. And while fans built entire myths around their relationship, those closest to Loretta knew the truth was more complex, a deep emotional bond that didn't fit into the world's labels. Behind the stage lights, they leaned on each other. Loretta, still married to Lynn, faced a marriage that was turbulent and unpredictable. Conway, meanwhile, carried his own private struggles, including the weight of constant touring and fame's quiet isolation. Their friendship became a refuge, one built on trust, not desire. It was the kind of connection that blurs the line between love and loyalty, between what the world sees and what the heart knows. In the years that followed, their names would become inseparable. They became a brand, Loretta and Conway, two voices, blending into one legacy. But as her daughter would later explain, the real story wasn't about their duets or chart success. It was about the emotional safety they found in each other, something Loretta rarely found anywhere else. And yet, even in those early years, there were whispers. Some fans thought the chemistry was too strong to be innocent. Some insiders claimed there was more, but Loretta never entertained the rumors. Instead, she would smile and say, "Conway's my singing partner and my friend." It was her way of protecting something pure from being turned into spectacle. Still, as her daughter later revealed, there were moments, quiet, unspoken, when even Loretta seemed unsure how to describe what they shared. It was more than friendship, less than romance, and entirely unique. A bond built not on fleeting passion, but on years of shared dreams and mutual understanding. By the mid-1970s, Loretta Lynn and Conway Twitty were the heartbeat of country music. Every time they stepped on stage together, the crowd went quiet, waiting for that spark. The easy laughter, the shared glances, the harmony that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than rehearsal. But that same chemistry that made them famous also became the source of constant speculation. Nashville insiders whispered, tabloids printed half-truths. Some claimed their connection had crossed into forbidden territory. Others insisted it was nothing but friendship. Yet through it all, neither Loretta nor Conway ever fed the gossip. They never denied their closeness, but they never turned it into a headline either. Instead, they did what they always did best. They sang. Loretta's daughter would later say that her mother and Conway didn't need to explain themselves. Their partnership spoke for them. Over a decade, they recorded 11 studio albums together, produced a string of #1 hits, and even won a Grammy. But behind every success was an emotional anchor: trust. Loretta trusted Conway with her music, her reputation, and sometimes her peace of mind. And Conway, who had seen how fame could twist a person's world, valued her honesty more than anything. Still, their bond wasn't without strain. Both carried heavy personal lives outside their partnership. Loretta's husband, Doolittle, struggled with jealousy, not only of Conway but of Loretta's fame itself. He had been with her since she was 15, through years of poverty and endless touring, but success had changed their dynamic. Meanwhile, Conway's own marriage to Dee Henry demanded discretion. He loved his family, yet the spotlight often blurred boundaries that ordinary people never had to face. To keep the peace, Loretta and Conway maintained what she once called a careful friendship. They traveled together, yes, but with chaperones. They shared hotel floors, but not rooms. They spent long nights talking about everything except themselves, about songwriting, about children, about how hard it was to stay true when the world was always watching. Their friendship became a lifeline in a business that could be cruel, especially to women. There were times when they grew distant, particularly in the early 80s, as solo commitments pulled them in different directions. Yet even then, the bond never faded. When Conway released solo hits like Tight Fittin' Jeans and Slow Hand, Loretta was among the first to celebrate his success. And when she released Honky Tonk Girl, and later You Ain't Woman Enough, Conway stood proudly beside her, often saying she was the toughest woman in Nashville. Time, more than anything, revealed their truth. It wasn't romance, it wasn't scandal, it was partnership, one built on shared respect, shared roots, and an unspoken promise to always protect one another. The public could speculate all they wanted, but those who saw them backstage knew theirs was a bond carved by years of late-night drives, quiet rehearsals, and mutual gratitude. Even years later, long after their last duet, Loretta kept Conway close in memory. She would talk about him as if he were still around, describing him not just as a friend, but as a brother she never had. In an industry full of fleeting alliances, theirs endured. Proof that not every story between a man and a woman in show business needs to be rewritten as a scandal. In June of 1993, the country music world woke to devastating news. Conway Twitty, the man whose voice had carried love songs across 3 decades, had collapsed while on tour. He was rushed to a hospital in Missouri, but despite every effort, he passed away the next day from an abdominal aortic aneurysm. He was just 59. When Loretta Lynn received the call, she was at home in Tennessee. Family members later recalled how she went silent, completely still, as if the world had frozen. For a long time she didn't speak at all. When she finally did, her words were simple: "I can believe he set's gone." For Loretta, Conway's death wasn't just the loss of a duet partner, it was the loss of her musical counterpart. The only artist who truly understood the rhythm of her voice and the depth of her lyrics. Together they had built something that couldn't be replaced. Every note of Led Me On or Feel-Ins carried years of trust, humor, and hard work. Now that harmony was gone. The days after his death were some of the hardest of her life. Loretta attended his funeral, walking into the service quietly, dressed in black, her head lowered. she placed a single rose near his casket. When she spoke later about that day, she said she felt as if she had lost part of herself. There was no public display of tears, no dramatic farewell, just a deep, private grief that her family saw in quiet moments back home at Hurricane Mills. Loretta's daughter would later remember that her mother didn't play Conway's records for a long time after his passing. The pain was too raw, but his absence seemed to linger everywhere, in the framed photos on the wall, in the set lists she still kept tucked inside old notebooks, in the silence between performances. Friends and bandmates said she talked about him often. Sometimes she'd laugh, remembering how he teased her before a show. Other times she'd go quiet, her eyes softening as she said, "He was one of a kind." She even kept a habit of saying "we" when speaking about career milestones long after Conway was gone. For a woman who had endured more than her share of loss, from her parents to her children, Conway's death left a unique emptiness. He wasn't family by blood, but he was family in every way that mattered. He had been her anchor through the chaos of fame, her partner in music, and her most trusted confidant on the road. The industry mourned with her. At the Grand Ole Opry, performers dedicated songs in Conway's honor. Radio stations across the country played their duets back to back, creating a kind of living memorial. Fans sent thousands of letters to Loretta's ranch, many of them saying the same thing, that her partnership with Conway had defined an era, and that the love and respect between them had been unmistakable. Loretta herself would later say that even though the world had lost Conway, she felt his presence every time she stepped on stage. "He's with me when I sing," she once told a friend. And for years that truth stayed visible, in the pauses before certain songs, in the emotion that filled her voice, and in the quiet moments when she'd glance toward an empty space on stage where Conway used to stand. Theirs was a story that ended too soon, but it never really faded, because as Loretta's daughter would later reflect, Conway wasn't just part of her mother's career, he was part of her life story. After Conway's death in 1993, Loretta Lynn faced a stage that suddenly felt twice as large and half as bright. The years they'd spent side by side, sharing microphones, long drives, and laughter, had created a rhythm that was now gone. But in true Loretta fashion, she didn't retreat from the spotlight. She carried on, quietly determined to honor the man who had once promised her, "I'll always sing with you one way or another." Through the late 90s and early 2000s, Loretta performed some of Conway's songs in her live shows, often dedicating them to "my dear friend Conway." When audiences applauded, she'd smile softly and say, "He's still around." It wasn't a line for effect, it was a truth she lived by. She felt his presence in the music itself. And every time she sang the first notes of "After the Fire Is Gone," it was as if he were right there again, harmonizing beside her. At home, Conway's memory never faded. Loretta kept photos of the two of them framed on her piano. She even had one of his guitars displayed near her own, a quiet reminder of a partnership that shaped not just her career, but her sense of belonging. Her children would often hear her humming one of their duets around the house, unaware she was even doing it. Music was how she grieved, how she remembered, and how she kept her promise to never let Conway's name drift into silence. When Loretta released her comeback album Van Lair Rose in 2004, produced by Jack White of the White Stripes, she proved that her artistry had never faded. The songs were raw, honest, and brave, traits Conway had always admired in her. White himself said he was inspired by her stories about Conway and how she spoke of him with both pride and sorrow. The album won 2 Grammy Awards, and during interviews, when asked about her career's longevity, Loretta would often glance upward and smile. "I've had some good help along the way." Behind those words was the memory of a man who had stood by her during some of her darkest hours. She often said Conway taught her what partnership really meant, that success meant nothing without loyalty, and she lived by that belief. In a business full of shifting alliances, Loretta stayed loyal to her roots, her family, her faith, and the people who'd walked the road with her. In her later years, as her health began to decline, Loretta grew more reflective about the past. Friends and family said she spoke of Conway more often, usually when talking about how fast time goes. She never called what they shared love in the romantic sense, but she never denied how deep it ran. It was a connection that defied the boundaries of marriage, fame, and even death. And as she often told close friends, "Some people you never stop missing." That sentiment became part of her legacy. Fans sought it in the way she performed, in the gentle reverence she held for the old songs, and in the loyalty she showed to those who had built her world. Conway was gone, but his influence echoed in everything she touched, in her phrasing, in her choice of songs, in the way she spoke about gratitude. When Loretta turned 90, she was still talking about Conway with the same warmth she had 50 years earlier. The world had changed, but that bond hadn't set. "We were meant to sing together," she said once. That's all there was to it. It was the simplest truth, and the one she carried with her to the very end. When people talk about country music's golden era, they often mention Loretta Lynn and Conway Twitty in the same breath, not just because of their songs, but because of what they represented together. In an industry built on competition, they showed the world the strength of partnership. Two artists at the height of their fame, sharing the stage without ego, blending their voices until they became one sound, timeless, familiar, and unmistakably theirs. Before Loretta and Conway, most duets in country music followed a formula: the man led, the woman followed. But from the moment they recorded After the Fire Is Gone, that dynamic shifted. Loretta didn't just stand beside Conway, she matched him line for line, emotion for emotion. Their songs told stories of love, heartbreak, and temptation, but always with balance, two voices reflecting both sides of a truth. Fans could feel the equality between them, and it resonated deeply, especially with women who saw in Loretta a symbol of strength and self-respect. Their success was staggering. Together they won 5 Academy of Country Music Awards, 4 Country Music Association Awards, and a Grammy. But the numbers only tell part of the story. What made them unforgettable was how real they felt, the authenticity that poured from every performance. They weren't acting, they were channeling something honest, something lived in. Conway once said in an interview that Loretta was the most natural singer he'd ever known, and Loretta often returned the compliment, saying Conway had a voice that could melt the paint off the walls. But what fans remember most isn't the compliments, it's the way they looked at each other on stage, like two people who had been through the same storms and found peace in the same song. In the years after Conway's death, many artists, from Reba McEntire to George Strait, credited the duo with showing what male-female collaborations could be: powerful, emotional, and equal. Their influence rippled through generations. Brooks and Dunn, Tim McGraw and Faith Hill, Garth Brooks and Trisha Yearwood, all followed the trail Loretta and Conway had blazed. And when younger artists paid tribute to Loretta after her passing, nearly every one of them mentioned Conway's name too, because their story was never truly separate. What's remarkable is how their partnership defied the times. The 70s and 80s were filled with industry politics, gender bias, and pressure to conform. Yet Loretta and Conway stayed true to themselves, two friends from humble beginnings who made music that spoke to ordinary people. Their songs didn't need glitter or spectacle, they needed only honesty, and that's what they gave every time they stepped on stage together. Loretta's daughter later said that her mother believed true art came from loyalty to one's self, to one's values, and to those who believed in you. And in Conway, Loretta found someone who shared that creed. Even after decades of fame, they never let Nashville's glamour distort who they were. They were country in the truest sense, grounded, simple, and real. When Loretta passed in 2022, tributes flooded in from around the world. But among the countless messages, One theme echoed most often: Loretta and Conway together again. Fans still see their story as unfinished, because in a way it is. Their legacy lives wherever two voices blend in harmony, wherever loyalty outlasts rumor, and wherever friendship becomes something sacred. It's been decades since they last sang together, yet their music still carries that same spark, that same emotional truth that can't be manufactured. Loretta and Conway didn't just sing country music, they defined it. And in doing so, they left behind a story not of scandal or heartbreak, but of respect, devotion, and a bond that even time couldn't silence. For Loretta Lynn, the stage was never just a place to perform. It was where she lived her truth. And for more than 2 decades, that truth often stood beside her in the form of Conway Twitty. Together they built something bigger than fame, bigger than the rumors, and bigger than even the songs themselves. They built trust. Their friendship defied categories. It wasn't romance, and it wasn't just business. It was two souls who found comfort in each other's company, who understood what it meant to chase dreams and carry burdens in the public eye. They faced the harsh spotlight of fame and managed to protect the one thing that mattered most: their respect for each other. Loretta's daughter has said that her mother never tired of talking about Conway, even in her final years. When she remembered him, it wasn't with regret or longing, but with gratitude. Because he had stood by her when the road was hardest, and she had done the same for him. Their story was proof that not all love stories have to be romantic to be eternal. Today, when fans hear their duets, they still feel that spark, that unspoken connection that made millions believe in loyalty, honesty, and friendship that endures. In every harmony they ever sang, there's a reminder that some bonds never fade, they simply change form and keep singing through time. For more emotional stories, check out this video.